go, Mr.?
Yep.
Good to go there, Mr. Tom?
Red. It's red, that's good.
Okay, let's call the order Smoky Mountain Finance Committee. First item of business is approval of the agenda.
Move to approve.
Is there a second?
Second, sir.
Is there any discussion? All in favor of approving the agenda, say aye. Aye. It's unanimous, all, okay. All right, approval of the January 22nd, 2015 Finance Committee minutes. Is everybody had a chance to review the minutes in great detail? There'll be a test of it.
There were a lot of budget amendments, so I'd be surprised if there wasn't question.
Okay.
Here last.
Oh, okay.
I don't think you can
Motion to approve, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, we have a motion to approve. Is there a second? Okay, Larry, second. Okay. All in favor of approving the minutes from our last meeting, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Yes. Okay, Fred, the moment you've been waiting for. 2014 financial
Out of
report.
this entire week, this is the moment
This
I'm
is-
waiting
That's
for.
right.
Okay. Well, we're reviewing the financial statements as of December 31st, so this is mid-year. The cautionary note is, in January, the board had passed an amendment to the budget. Those amendments are not included in here because they were effective January 22nd, so they post-date these specific statements. And that has some repercussions on some of the comments that I would make in the next 20 minutes or so. So cash checking in press fund is at 86.8 million. Cash in Medicaid risk reserve, which is both represented in assets and fund balance, is at 15.3, 15.4. The investment in the North Carolina Capital Management Trust stands at 13.8, let's call it, $1 million. Accounts receivable to the security. This reflects 50% of all the categories of service except innovations. Innovations, we recognize revenue at 100%. The reason for that is it has been very slow in coming, but it has been coming with 100% accuracy. Post-note, meaning after December 31st. We did in February receive a significant payment for past accounts receivable that, as best as we can determine, account for 92% of what has been owed within the past several months. However, that's not reflected in this statement because it's as of December 31st. But from a cash point of view, we're looking good in terms of reducing that accounts receivable. Another footnote is in January, because of a technical, there's no other way of putting it, because of a technical snafu, I was going to use another less appropriate word,
That's probably good. That term.
accounts receivable hit the roof, meaning we didn't get paid millions. It was a substantial, discernible amount. I saw the electronic report of what was deposited, and I knew something immediately was wrong. It was wrong statewide, they corrected it, it reflected itself in February. Is that a nice way of putting it? Okay. Going to the liability side, accounts payable of 6.9 million, thereabouts, and the IBNR incurred but not received on Medicaid stands at 16.1. Going to the fund balance, I'm going to the unassigned section, current year, meaning from July 1st to December 31st. We've accrued a revenue over expense on the Medicaid side of $4.5 million, on all other sources of funds at $3.2, and the other two rows account for prior years. But those two numbers account for gains made this year as of December 31st.
Are those numbers about, since we're halfway, do you think they should be?
Yeah, you're asking how they'll hold up year end? Well, I can safely tell you on the Medicaid side, it will grow, but it will grow at a decreasing rate. And that will become apparent as we go through the statements. And I think as far as overall, it will be slightly less than double, but I think on the Medicaid side, we definitely, because as you see the trends, our cost to expense ratio is getting narrow. And there's some reasons for that, but we'll be fine year end, but it will not be double this number by year end. Questions? Going to the more detailed balance sheet. Now I'll focus on the first 5 columns on the Medicaid side, specifically the 5th column. Medicaid revenue for the period, the first 6 months, is at $127.2 million. Expenses as $125.3, let's call it, million, with a revenue over expense of 1.9. On the administrative side, revenues of 17.2, expenses at 14.6 million, with a revenue over expense of 2.5, let's call it 2.6 million, with a total on the Medicaid side of revenue over expense at 4.5 million. Questions? Going to the next few columns under state and federal. On the revenue side, overall, we have let's call it 29.2 million. On the expense side, 27 million for a surplus or revenue over expense of approximately $2 million. On the expense side, on the administrative side, revenue of 2.7, 2.8 million, expense of 3, and yes, there's a net deficit on the state and federal side as far as administration of a total of $325,000 year to date, December 31st. So the total, as far as state and federal, is services and administration, revenue over expense is at 1.7 million. So as we go to the total column, reflecting operations summarized on the Medicaid side, the state side, as well as the federal side, total revenues of $159.8 million, expenses of $154.8 million, with a net surplus or revenue over expense of 4.9 or approximately $5 million. Administration only, revenues of $20.4 million, expenses of $17.7, with a net revenue over expense of $2.7 million. So as far as overall operations for the year, this being half year, December 31st, we have a net revenue over expense of $7.7 million. Overall, that's about 4.8% of overall operations mid-year.
Is that in the neighborhood of what you? Maybe that's not a fair question.
Yeah, let me rephrase it a bit.
Okay.
Overall, is it what I expected? Yes. Its distribution concerns me a little, but we can get into that in details.
Okay.
Going to the next column is pretty much the clinical services budget. Again, my footnote to this is that this is mid-year. The amendments that the board had passed as of January 22nd, it added significant amounts of Medicaid revenue to the mix. So these deficits year-to-date are not as high as they are represented here mid-year. However, the trends are accurate. So the dollar amounts are less in terms of deficits in certain line items, but the trends are what the trends are. So highlighting some concerns here in terms of overall, we know that we have difficulties as far as innovations in Medicaid C overall. That's been difficult all year. It will be difficult year end. It was a major subject as far as DMA is concerned in our data book meeting this last week, which I'll talk about a little more in detail later. It remains a concern. The others, which may be less obvious, are long-term care residential, because there will be a reallocation that appears later in the clinical services budget. Inpatient, which has been difficult consistently, and outpatient, which we've had some difficulty in, is trending up as we go into FY16. However, net, meaning overall, for B services, C services, and B3 services, we are a positive of $871,000 mid-year. So it's the balancing issue here. Questions? Ridgefield. Here is just a presentation of what's occurred to date, meaning as of January 31st in this case. So this departs from the other financials in that sense. What prepaid has been done to date as far as the project is concerned. So it's a total of $219,000, almost $220,000 overall. And expenses incurred of an additional $528,000. In terms of overall spending, we're not quite halfway because a lot of the computer equipment, networking equipment, network wiring, all of that is not fully represented in the expenses shown here because of not all of the work has been done. But that's what we showed today. Questions? No one said it was cheap.
Seeing the facility when it's completed. Guess you are too,
But not too nice. Just the right amount of nice. I know how that is.
Now going to some of the ratios and how that looks like. First going to medical expense ratio. This is what our revenue is, our expense over revenue. So if they're exactly the same, then you would talk about 100%. That's how this kind of works. So it's expense over revenue on the Medicaid side. And as you see, it's trending. That gap is narrowing, and I expect that that probably will be sustained for the balance of the fiscal year. So it currently stands at somewhere around 99%. It's hard to read from this particular statement, but it's hovering around the 99% mark. The next one talks about state and federal. It is in the gap between 90 and 100%, which is where you want to see it. It is trending up, and that is appropriate given from where we started in the fiscal year. There were some contracting issues that affected that low level of expenditure early in the year. I won't comment on the other two ratios unless someone has a specific issue. I would state as far as total administration is concerned, the difference between what is budgeted and what is expended is all turnover savings, meaning vacancies. That's been a challenge during the course of the year, and all of the savings identified that you have seen in the that expense sheet, the income and expense sheet, is also reflected here in that. Is vacancy savings.
savings or savings.
Medical current ratio, it is healthy on the Medicaid side. We're talking about current ratio of 2.6. This is current assets over current liabilities on the Medicaid side. Overall, from all funding sources, it is at 3.88, which is in both measures healthy, and that trend continues. I won't comment on the other dashboards in great detail. Going to the budget versus year-to-date actual, this is Medicaid paid claims. This reinforces some of the other comments that I've made as far as service issues. Innovations is an issue, outpatient is an issue, inpatient is an issue, and there's somewhat a reversal. It would appear that long-term residential is okay and TRF is problematic. It's more like as we go into January and February, you'll see a switch in those roles, unfortunately. But that's the way it is. Going to the pie charts, as far as Medicaid service by service category, this has been a consistent picture, and that is that ICFMR and innovations account for 53% of our expenditures for all services that the LMEMC is responsible for. And that's been fairly consistent throughout the year. The same can be said by Medicaid expenses by category of aid, where fully 83% is accounted by three categories, and that is AFDC for 3 and over, blind and disabled for 21 over, and innovations. Literally speaking, those three categories account for 83% of the pie. And unless there are any questions, I will leave it at that as far as the dashboards.
Do we need action on this?
Nope.
Okay. So, next item would be the updates.
Well, the only update that I would refer to, and I would ask that Brian harp in on this. This was my first experience going through the data book initial review. This is with Mercer, who is a contractor of the Division of Medical Assistance, and they pretty much determine through an elongated process what the PMPM will be for the coming year. So this is what's going to happen in FY16. So there is a review of the assumptions going into that particular year. And it stretched over about an hour and a half, thereabouts, highlighting some of the cost drivers as we saw it, and some of their initial analytics in reference to things that they would be excluding or including within their calculations. I don't think anything particularly jumped out at me, except to say that, how to say this, never assume that a government entity tells its vendor everything. So I got the distinct impression on several subjects that we were informing Mercer of some things that the state did not inform them of. Is that an interesting way of putting it?
Yeah, well, that's, the nature of the relationship between Mercer and the state, I think has become more and more a matter of, Mercer, they're the experts, and we're able to participate in this, I think, in as much a way as any, educating Mercer about us. So I'm never too much relying on the state to do a lot of education or marketing for us, and these are folks from Mercer that we've been with now for a few years. Jonathan in particular, the lead guy. And this is, this is the normal process that we go through with the negotiation and eventual execution of an agreement around our capitation. And that lasts for a year, so it's a pretty big deal. This is the first phase where we talk about the things that Mercer and the state believes will influence our capitation, and we do the same thing. We try to talk about things that are not necessarily reflected in our financial statement things that are different about us? What are things that are going to be happening in the next year that would change the trajectory of our spending, either for services or administration? So this is kind of the first round. We have some follow-up to do. I even suggested an additional meeting, which is a novel kind of approach for this kind of cycle, to talk about our interest in advancing an initiative around Medicaid reform that, again, very different from what other folks are doing, and may have a bearing on how they look at our capitation. So we'll keep you posted.
Anything else?
I guess we could add this year we're using a consultant on this. Milliman? Deloitte. In the past, Tara's been very helpful with this. Of course, she's kind of the Medicaid goddess. Almost embarrassing sometimes with what she knows and other people don't. But as a contractor for us, I think Deloitte, brings kind of an actuarial expertise to this that we don't have, that would be helpful. And again, there's ways that they can help us this year, and over time it'll be an important relationship with us. It's up to us, how smart we can become around this and how good negotiators we can be is all for us. So, kind of how we look at it. Fred's good, but he's not an actuary.
Any other questions about anything else on the agenda for the finance committee? That would be one of the shortest finance committees we've ever had.
Don't jinx us now.
I know. Is that, so, you suggest we do
John,
that?
do a motion to approve the financials? I don't think Jill and I got that.
To approve it and refer to the main board. I'll make that motion.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Okay, that's unanimous. Do we need to make a motion to adjourn? Sorry, we didn't do that, Paul, right? Is there a motion to adjourn? Sure, John.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Is there a second?
Second.
All right.
There you go.
All in favor of adjourning, say aye.
Aye. Thank you for
Start, everyone. Let's get started. Welcome, everyone. At this time, I'll call the roll. See who's here. Nancy Baker.
Here.
Ronnie Beal.
Here.
Jim Carlson here. Here. Larry Cox.
Here.
Casey Cooper. Carolyn Coward.
Here.
Joyce Edwards. Maggie Faulkner.
Here.
Vicki Green. Here. Myrna Harris.
Here.
Jeff Heck. Here. Judy Johansson.
Here.
Michael's here. Kathy Guinness.
Here.
Morris Pittman. Judy Poe. Nancy Stone. Duncan Sumter. And Charles Lyons. Here. And we have 11 plus 6 or 7 proxies, right? 7. Okay. Next item on the agenda is public comment. Jerry Rice is our speaker tonight. You can video yourself, Jerry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. I might be the only one speaking on public comment, but I'm not by myself.
Okay,
I would like to introduce y'all to something. We're passing your paper around. It is a book on plague. You ever heard of a plague? If you read the Bible, you see a lot about plague back in the old days. But
The plague.
the plague. Well, he don't say the plague, he says plague. But anyway, this is about one scientist's interpreted search for the truth about human retrovirus and chronic fatigue syndrome, ME of CFS, autism, and other diseases. Now, I know that y'all are not medical people, except for one or two in the room, but when you talk about behavioral health, what is the root cause? It's something usually other than just behavior. Something's got to cause that behavior. What I like about this scientist here, not only that she's a personal friend to me, but she lives in California. She's worked in research for 35 years. She has wrote this book because of a very serious problem that happened in her life that brought it to a point of whether she was going to take the right road, the middle road, or the left road. So she took the right road. She's going to stand on her convictions, and that's something you rarely see in professional people that's in government or in the industry of any kind. So when you read this book, I'm wanting you to see the bigger picture. When you're talking about behavioral health, there's something more to it than just acting out. And I think we need to focus on the root causes. The thing that I really like about this is, you know, most of us that I know here profess to be Christians. This lady is a Christian too. And what I like about her, she stood on her convictions. She's spreading the word, and this is a very new book. And it's going to upset the medical community, and it's going to upset behavioral health. It's going to upset everybody when you read what's in here. Because there's a greater aspect to this than just reading the book. This is a human person. This is a human life. This is somebody like Christ stood in there one day and made a fact, made a statement, and wouldn't back down. And how many people can say that today? Have we ever come up on something that we was honestly truthful about? And how many of us stood on it, and how many of us backed down from it? So I want to introduce you this book because I think it's really an asset to behavioral health to see where it goes. As well as our medical community, we have a lot of issues that we're wanting to bring in the medical to the behavioral. Well, when we all look at it, what is it? Something's got to cause the behavior. So thank y'all very much for letting me introduce you to this. Thank you.
Thank you, Jerry.
I'm going to give this to Dr. Martin here, this book, and I told him to read it and maybe help y'all to understand some things in it a little bit.
Thank you, Jerry.
Thank you, Mr. Martin.
Thank you. Next item on the agenda is to review and approval of agenda and prior meeting minutes. Has everyone had a chance to review the agenda and the minutes from last month? You got 5 minutes. Maybe not. Is there a motion for approval of the agenda and the minutes from the January meeting? We have a motion, is there a second? Second. All in favor of the motion say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay, unanimous. Okay, Consumer and Family Advisory Committee report. I call Pat McGinnis.
Hi, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. Our steering committee met on February the 9th. We reviewed the Smoky Mountain LME MCO budget. We also heard updates from each local chair about activities in the local groups. Our current steering committee projects include continued work group efforts to amend the CFAC bylaws, updating the relational agreement with the Smoky Mountain Board of Directors, addressing transportation concerns for CFAC members. The steering committee also began planning a face-to-face meeting in May to review and comment on the proposed 2015-16 Smoky budget, to hear a presentation on the ACOs, and to tour the new Ridgefield offices. Our steering committee will meet again on April the 13th. Regional CFACs met in January, and during the January meetings, regional groups were updated on the ADAC proposal, and information was shared about the findings of the North Carolina Stakeholder Engagement Group Initiative. Groups also heard a presentation about consumer relations team at Smoky. And each regional CFAC will hear report outs from their representatives on the Provider Council, Human Rights Committee, Innovation Stakeholder Committee, and to include the agenda items, current projects or work groups, actions taken, and any concerns presented. Our regional CFACs will meet in March. The Central Region will be March the 9th. The Western Region will be March the 10th. The Southern Region will be the 16th of March, and the Northern Region will be the 17th. There was a state to local CFAC meeting a week or so ago in the eastern part of the state. It was statewide, but due to the weather and travel, nobody from this region attended. I did attend the state to local CFAC conference call a week or so ago, but as far as going to the meeting, that was in Wilson, North Carolina, none of us could make it due to the weather. But I did go to something else some of you folks might be a little bit interested in. A week or so ago, there was a meeting not far from here that Courtney Cantrell and Jessica Keith were at, facilitated, and this was a meeting where none of the providers and none of the staff were at. It was kind of a closed private meeting, come out of the stakeholder engagement group initiative that I've been involved in. And one of the things that struck me is a lot of people are hurting. It's like some of the pegs don't fit in the, you can't put square pegs in a round hole. And some people needed minor things that were being forced, like with the situation, maybe somebody needed a modification to a wheelchair, but that didn't fit in the right block, so they're going to have to get a new wheelchair, just a variety of different things. But, you know, I told them I didn't really have any concerns with Smoky that I felt, and I told them when I went that I represented me, not anybody else. But, you know, that some of my issues have been bigger in trying to re-enter things in the community. But, you know, I told them, it looks real good when you're sitting here and it's on paper and we're planning these things, but you go out in the community and you try to exercise some of these things and it don't always work the same way that it looks like it's supposed to. For even people as high functioning and well involved as I am in the community. So, you know, that was more what I wanted to talk about, and the fact that another consumer had called me and needed transportation was primarily the reason I went. But because these meetings are held at places where it's not easy to access from a bus route or something like that. But the thing that shocked me though is the number of people there. I mean, you know, they had to cut registration off at a certain number, and you know, all the parking places were full. Some of them were CFAC members, some of them were community members that come to these things occasionally, but the room is full. And so, you know, we need to be a voice and we need to listen, and we need to be the ones they want to come to, I think, to talk to. So I just want to tell y'all that I went to that and that the room was full, and I guess we have our work cut out for us. So thank you.
Thank you, Pat. Any questions? Thank you, Ken.
And Judy or Nancy may have something to add about CFAX, but I'll give you my 2 cents.
Okay.
I think the only other thing is, with the new building, kind of the new, coming up here at 356 Biltmore, as far as CFAC, our CFAC, and trying to get info back out to all of them, I will be on the oversight committee for, so I am looking forward to that. I kind of got started at the root of it, and I want to continue this and make sure it's done and done right, so I am looking forward to that.
Just wanted to ask a question. So most of these people are consumers or families of consumers at that
And
meeting?
most of the folks, with the exception of myself and my friend Bonnie, who wanted to go to it and called me up and asked me, was I going, would I come get her and take her, who lives here in Asheville. So we were probably the 2 only mental health consumers there, even though it was supposed to come out of the cross disability group. Most of them there were folks representing IDD, but it's supposed to have been a cross disability initiative that's where these came out of. And some of them are really struggling.
So what was your impression about what they really needed the most? I mean, what was the...
One of the things they talked about was staffing and backup staffing, And of course, you know, that's something we've heard. One of the things that surprised me though, and I've been a former person that's done one-on-one work and also worked in an institution on the front lines, is some of the folks, the level of expertise for their one-on-one workers that they want to work with their family members was just amazing to me. I mean, you know, they're wanting folks with bachelor's degrees and master's degrees, some of them, to do one-on-one work. And, you know, they're wanting well-trained, well-educated, well-paid folks. And I guess things are changed a good bit in the last few years as to what folks want. But backup staffing was a big thing. Respite care was another. Then we had one lady talked about wheelchair issues and just a variety of different things. But I was impressed with the fact that the division took notes, I guess, to take back to Raleigh. That particular day, I think there were 2 public meetings in Asheville. One of them was supposed to be in later in the evening and at the VR place. We didn't go to that, where everybody, I think, was welcome. But this was more private meeting where they just talked about a variety of their things. And, of course, you know, they still wanted opportunities if they needed to be the ones providing the service. And there's a good variety of things, but most of it was pertaining to the IDD population. We went for another reason. Sometimes I have a very strange role trying to be on disability rights and this board and not. I have to try to really sit down sometimes and think about who I want to talk to about what and how I want to handle things to do it in an ethical manner. And so we had a situation where somebody had told me somebody's rights were being violated when it came to their money, and this was a formerly homeless person. And, you know, I brought it to somebody's attention at Smoky, but we had actually went to bring that out, but I don't think we brought that out in public. But, you know, these consumers that have payees and guardians and this, that, and the other, it's amazing what's happening to them. You know, from what I understand, some of them that have payees can't even get a statement at the end of the month as to how their money's been spent. You know, and one of them that, maybe more, maybe a variety, the rent's being paid late. They're getting hit with late charges. They had a humongous cable bill, but they called the cable company to maybe try to work on their cable bill. The cable company has no record of them having cable, so they're not even getting a credit reference if they've got cable. John's daughter had an instance. She's got cancer again for the 2nd time in 2 years. And the week of Martin Luther King, she didn't call DSS in a timely manner to request help with transportation to get to Winston-Salem to the cancer doctor. So she called the house the day or so before she had to go, and she was panicking, and she has a variety of issues, everything from some probably DD issues to mental health issues to physical health issues, but most of her care comes out of and started it from physical and with DSS, although she does get some things now from Smoky. But so the woman had said, well, you know, we had talked to John's sister, had been taking her to the doctor's appointments in Winston-Salem, but, you know, John's not really in a shape to be running back and forth to Winston-Salem that much, and this, that, and the other. He's aging, has health problems of his own. And, you know, if you find somebody to donate their time to go, that's a great thing. But then they shouldn't have to come up with the money out of their pocket to take somebody. So there's, what I understand, some kind of programs that we never really understand that much, where DSS does help with transportation and money. Well, I called them, and I said, you know, I'd like to know what your policy on reasonable accommodation is. And I called the director, and she's like, well, who is this? And I'm like, I think we spoke a year or two ago, you know, on something else. And she's like, well, who are you? I can't talk to you. I'm like, no, you can't talk to me, but I can talk to you. And she's like, and why are you involved? And why does she tell you? And, you know, and I'm like, well, I don't know. Might be I'm on the board of directors for disability rights, might be I'm on this, might be I'm on that. I don't know. I just want to know what your policy on reasonable accommodations was. Because it seems like she might need one. And she did get one, you know. But, you know, the first thing that was said to me, though, is when I mentioned reasonable accommodations, and I hope I don't PO anybody by saying this, but I'm just going to be honest with you. The first thing that was said to me, well, have you thought about guardianship? And, you know, it's a big jump from needing the money to go to the cancer clinic in Winston-Salem to needing a guardian because you don't call in a timely manner to ask for a gas voucher or whatever. So, you know, I don't know whether that call went good or it went bad, because to me, I take guardianship and this pay stuff and all this stuff real serious. I don't want nobody in charge of me, and I don't want to see other people in charge of other people that are not ready for it. And, you know, I'm thinking, my God, how often is this happening? Is it easier to give somebody a guardian than it is a reasonable accommodation? You know, so it's been eye-opening week. So now, that was another reason I went to this meeting up here in Asheville, and I mentioned that situation too, and about how easy it may seem to be for people to end up with a guardian that may not need a guardian, and they need to go with least restrictive instead of more restrictive. So I don't know. I don't know if I've answered your question or I'll just babble, but I'll just probably give you something to think about.
It's interesting to hear, thank you.
Did you have anything to add?
Me? No, thank you, I think it's been said.
Okay. Thank you. Provider advisory council report, Duncan's not here, so is anybody going to give that report?
I heard from him, he's running late.
Okay. We'll move right along. County Commissioner Advisory Board report. Vicki Green is actually ill. Shelley's not here, so it's snowy day.
Well, we can talk about the,
Well, I think is nominating committee on
It
it.
is, I was going to talk about that.
Yeah.
But I think it's been rescheduled for, I believe, the last week of March.
March 24 or
But
something.
prior to our next board meeting.
What is that, Tracy? That's finished?
The county commissioner advisory board, you know, they meet quarterly instead of monthly.
They were supposed to meet 50, but it's called. Next item on the agenda is report of the finance committee and the chief finance officer. And this time I'll call on Fred to bring us up to date. Our finance committee meeting we had earlier. Fred?
We did. I will cover some of the same material, so it's usually for those members who are also here now. And cover a few of the debt boards that will present in front of you all. A couple of footnotes. This is I'm reviewing the balance sheet and financial statements as of December 31st. That's significant because the board on the January 22nd meeting approved amendments that are not reflected in this statement since it occurred in January. Cash and checking and interest fund is at $68 million, $68.8 million. The Medicaid risk reserve, which is also stated not only in the asset part of the balance sheet, but on the fund balance as well, is at 15.4. Let's call that. Rounding it up. Investments in North Carolina Management Trust stand at $13.67 million. And I will address the accounts receivable here as far as Medicaid is concerned. This is somewhat different than has been approved in the past, in the sense that we have recognized for innovations and innovations only. The entire accounts receivable appears very clear that we're collecting all of what has been owed, but it has been late in terms of its collection. So we feel fairly confident that all that we know about in terms of what is the will that we need to be collected, so that will be in this amount. However, post this date, post December 31st, in January, there was a technical snafu on NC Track part, and there was a significant increase in the accounts receivable in that month. This occurred with all the LMEs and COs. I could tell from the statement that I had received just electronically in terms of notification, there was a considerable underpayment that has been made and compensated for in the February check write, but things have not come down in terms of how this particular line item has appeared in the following months. So it reflects January, February, you will see that in future statements, but as of December 31st, this is what it is as of that date. On the liability side of the equation, accounts payable stands at just under $7 million, with the accounts payable IBNR on the Medicaid side being at 16.1 million. Going down to the unassigned portion of the balance sheet for the current fiscal year, being from July 1 to December 31st, we have added on the Medicaid side in terms of revenue over expense 4.5 million, in terms of other revenue sources of 3.2. The following two rows would reflect prior year additions to the balance sheet. Any questions or reference to that? Going to the following more detailed analysis of revenue and expenditures. I won't name everyone in reference to going through each and every column. I would highlight that on the Medicaid side, I'm looking at column 5 here. On the revenue side, we have 147.2 million, expenses of 125.2, with a net revenue over expense of 1.9 million. Looking on the administrative side, going further down on those columns, revenue of 17.2, expenses of 14.6, with a net revenue over expense of 2.6 million. Overall, on the Medicaid side, reflecting revenue expense of 4.5 million. On the state side, revenue 29.2 million, expenses of 27.1 million, with net revenue over expense on services for state and federal of $2 million. On the administrative side, revenue of 2.76, expenses of 3 million, and yes, there's a net deficit as far as administration on the state and federal side of 325,000 year to date for the first half year. So total on state and federal, we are looking at net revenue over expense of 1.7 million. Totaling that from all sources, revenue as of December 31st is 159.8 million, expenses of 154.8, with a net revenue over expense of approximately just under $5 million. On the administrative side, revenue of $20.4 million, expenses of $17.7 million, with a net revenue over expense of 2.7. Almost all of that net gain can be attributed to vacancies, both on the salaries and on the benefit side of the so combined, all sources, net revenue expense year to date of about $7.7 million. Questions?
Where's the fund balance at?
The fund balance is on the balance sheet, which is the first. I think in yours, it's another color.
That's the total of the fund balance?
Correct. So if you think about the accounting equation of assets equal liabilities plus owner's equity, fund balance is the owner's equity part.
Okay. I mean, for $111 million.
It's not personal. The next sheet is the Medicaid budget as far as services are concerned. Again, this does not reflect the additions that were made as of January 22nd that the board has passed. So these balances do change somewhat. They don't look, it adds additional revenue to the budget so that the deficits are not quite as extreme as appear on here, although net overall for all total under Medicaid waiver is on positive. As far as B and C, it's ameliorated somewhat by the revenue that was recognized in January. However, some of the trends remain consistent in areas that we've been looking at, specifically in innovations and certainly in communication as well. So both of them are consistent issues that we have to watch and follow through the course of the year. But overall, as far as the service on the Medicaid side, we are 871,000 to the bill. Attached is an expenditure report for Richfield. I won't comment upon it except to say that as of January 31st, this is the only statement that is for a different time period. This is what has been committed or spent as of that day for our meeting. Questions? In looking at the ratios, first is the Medicaid, the medical expense ratio for Medicaid. It is approximately at 99%. Reminder, when we talk about this specific ratio, we're talking about expenses over revenue, so that if you have $1 of expense over $1 of income, the ratio would be 100. So in this case, it's 99. It will hover around that for the balance of the year. For other sources of funds, we will look at only 92, 93%. Questions? I am now looking at the Medicaid current ratio. This is a measure of current assets over current liabilities. Stands on the Medicaid side at 2.6, which is healthy, and it's a good thing to see. And as far as all sources, it stands at 3.88, which is quite good. So I would say that our financial position overall is fine. Questions, issues? Unless there are questions in regards to the other pie charts or other graphs here, either this is.
We need a motion to accept the report.
Yes.
Is there a motion to accept the financial report as presented?
I'll make a motion.
Second. Motion is second. Any discussion, more discussion or questions? You got a question?
No, she was second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, unanimous. Let's go back a minute since Duncan's here. Duncan, welcome. Can you give us a provider advisory council report?
Sure. First, I apologize for being late, Mr. Chair, but as the saying goes, better late than never.
That's right. We're glad you're here.
From the provider report, we have not had a provider meeting since our last board meeting. The two major things to report on are, number one, there's a work group to work on the provider survey responses, and that is moving strongly with a lot of help from Smokey and the work group. They've been working very hard on that. The other work group that's been doing a lot of work in the interim is the integrated care work group. We had to cancel or postpone our regular meeting due to weather, but that'll be back on track, but that work group continues to go strong. So those are the two major things to report on from the provider side.
Thank you, Dr. Ford. Okay, moving right along, we have bylaws and policy report. We have our general counsel and board attorney, Dr. Kay and Jay Howard. Who's going to lead us all?
I'll start with the policy. Is it this in the back? Yes.
It is.
So, Smoky's getting ready for its URAC reaccreditation submission. We, as you know, are accredited by URAC in the areas of health call center, health network, and health utilization management. And just like our providers have to be accredited, we have to be accredited, and that involves a lot of paperwork. So we are involved in getting all that paperwork submitted. And one of those pieces of paper is the requirement that we have a clearly outlined mission, vision, values statement, and that we accurately describe our organizational structure. So ELT has been meeting to discuss this. This policy had not been revised since before Smoky went live with the waiver. So as you can imagine, our organization has changed quite a bit since then. And we also felt that it was time to update our mission, vision, and values to reflect the organization that we have become. But this is a very important statement for us, and so we need you also to be on board with this statement. So what we've come up with is our mission statement, and the mission statement is essentially who we are as an organization. And what we are saying is that Smoky is a public manager of care for individuals facing challenges with mental illness, substance use, and/or intellectual developmental disabilities. Our goal is to successfully evolve in the healthcare system by embracing innovation, adapting to a changing environment, and maximizing resources for the long-term benefit of the people and communities we serve. The vision statement is the vision of what it is you want to build. What is the future we are trying to create? And the future that we want to create are communities where people get the help they need to live the life they choose. And then the values that we believe in are person-centeredness, which we believe means interacting with compassion, cultural sensitivity, honesty, and empathy. Integration, which is caring for the whole person within home and community of an individual's choice. Commitment, which for Smoky means that we are dedicated to partnering with consumers, families, providers, and others to foster genuine, trusting, respectful relationships that are essential to creating the synergy and connections that make lives better. An example of that would be what we have been able to achieve with the C3 at 356 project. Integrity, this is a big one for us, and this is ensuring quality care and accountable financial stewardship through ethical, responsive, transparent, and consistent leadership and business operations. So before I move on, see if you have any questions about the mission, vision, and value statement. Organizational structure, I am not going to bore you all with going through this word for word. It's not as important as the mission, vision, and values. The first section just describes our functions. This might be a handy document for you to keep when people want to know what it is that we do or how we're organized. If you'll scroll down to paragraph 6, that's essentially what we do. We operate 3 different benefit plans. We operate the MHDDSA benefit plan under the B waiver. We operate the Innovations Waiver benefit plan under the C waiver. And then we operate a state-funded benefit plan for indigent individuals with the state and county funds that we receive. In terms of our organizational structure, we have obviously the board of directors, the CEO, our ELT and management team. We have a number of committees and cross-functional teams, and many of those committees and CFTs include CFAC members and providers. We have 11 internal departments, and then we have 4 advisory bodies, and that's our County Commissioner Advisory Board, our CFAC, our Human Rights Committee, and our Provider Advisory Council. Those are our 4 advisory bodies. Obviously, you know enough about the board, I don't have to repeat all that stuff. The description of what Brian does, description of what Christina does, who is in ELT, so you know, and who is part of our management team. And then there's just a brief description of each department. The finance department, you know what they do. Fred comes here every month and tells you all about what they do. Our medical leadership under our chief medical officer, Dr. Martin. Our information system has become such a huge part of what we do, and Robert was kind enough to write a nice description of everything they do. Legal and compliance, you hear enough from me, so I'm not going to repeat that. Description of our care coordination program, our clinical operations functions, what community collaboration does, customer services, human resources, planning and public affairs, which is Shelley's department, and our provider network. And then at the end, I think we've got our QIO department, and that's where our waiver contract manager is. That's who Julie is. And so she is chiefly responsible for making sure that we are doing everything we are required to do under our contract with DMA to operate the Medicaid waiver. And then our advisory boards are listed in the last section. That's got our, as I mentioned, our advisory board, our county commissioner, the CFAC, Human Rights, Provider Advisory Council. So this is just a document that UREC requires us to have. We think we've updated it so it at least accurately reflects who we are and what we do today, rather than what we did 3 years ago. Does anybody have any questions?
And what is the term, Tracy? For how long is it, the accreditation once?
Oh, the accreditation is for 3 years.
3 years.
But we have to review and approve this policy annually, and so that's something that we have not been great about doing. So my goal is to bring this to you guys every year at the retreat. We'll get on a regular schedule and we'll look at this so that we can show, if we're audited, that we have performed our review of this document. Chuck, do you have a question?
Come here.
Anybody?
Tracy, were there any big changes made in mission or vision statements or values? Any changes from 3 years ago?
Oh, yeah.
Well, I thought there might be.
It really reflected us as an LME. It didn't really talk about any kind of vision for the future. And so this, we think, really more reflects the way we operate today and the vision for the future that we have. So yes, it's changed.
You put this in a time capsule and see, pull it out in 10 years, if any of us are here, and think, wow, they didn't know anything. Yeah, what a crazy thing happened. I think it's, I'm real happy. It was, these things are a lot harder. You see it all written out like this, like, oh yeah, well, that's bad. I don't want to try to estimate how long it took us to actually come up with that, but it was good work. I think it does do a good job of reflecting the organization we are, and something about our approach to the future and how we see ourselves, which is different.
And there's a commitment to change wide.
Well, how's that saying go? Change is a constant, survival is optional. Something like that, I think you get the idea. This is kind of a little bit of tomorrow we're getting into the notion that, in mental health reform, of course, we had, this progression from area programs to LMEs to LME MCLs, and people probably thought, well, once that got done, then that'd be it. But that's far from true. We're just getting ready to go to the next iteration, I think, of what we will become, and what our role will be with healthcare reform and Medicaid reform. That'll be kind of the next. I think it'll be that'll be another book in the volume that I look at. That's a multi-year thing. But we're not done.
Do you need an endorsement from the board
we need you to approve this policy, yes.
Then I make a motion, we approve the policy.
Okay, we have a motion, is there a second?
Second.
Okay, motion second. Any more discussion?
A little bit comment, very, very good night. About three, months down the road, probably been going for it to be updated at that point. So the things that would change, you really very long today. Very nice.
Thank you. All in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Unanimous. Okay.
The next item on the agenda is the bylaws. And I have to apologize to the because I forgot to print them out for people. These were the same ones that we handed out at last month's board meeting. So there's nothing critical or time sensitive. And we don't have a full board here tonight, so I'm going to ask that maybe we postpone it until the next meeting so that everybody will have the opportunity to review and look at the changes.
Anything else?
Okay.
Jay? Oh, come on, Jay.
I think Tracy very capably handled that. They get paid for they do.
Well, thank you very much.
Right.
Next item on the agenda is the nominating committee. Vicki Green is the chair of that committee, and Vicki can't be with us tonight. She's under the weather. I can tell you that the nominating committee had a conference call Monday, and is going to recommend Ira Dove from Hayden County and Billy Kennedy from Otago County to take Paul and Ed's places. But we cannot take action tonight. That those nominations have to be reviewed and discussed with the advisory, county commissioner advisory committee, which will be meeting later in March. That's correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, are we gonna, let me just see if we're on the same page, are we gonna wait till then to
Alright.
get this done, or how, it's kind of a, it would have been perfect if we would have had that meeting, gotten that taken care of, and we could have come here tonight, heck, we could have even invited them, and we could have stayed tomorrow, but we've really gotten out of phase now, so are we gonna wait for,
The county commissioner advisory board meeting is scheduled to occur the Tuesday prior to our board meeting. So assuming there are no other weather-related events and it happens, the plan is to present the recommendations to the county commissioner advisory board first
for March?
for March. They'll provide input. And then it would be presented to the full board here for vote the following Thursday.
We would not go ahead and vote on with the condition they be approved by the advisory committee.
They don't actually have to get approved by the advisory committee. The advisory board does not approve them, they just provide input. So
So in other words, we can vote on it today.
you could, I think it would make it look to the advisory board that their input goes meaningless.
We gotta let them do something. We gotta let them.
I don't know, do you wanna, anybody wanna just offer any kind of discussion about these folks?
Well, if you don't know who Ira Dove is now the county manager of Haywood County, former DSS director of Haywood County. Has been involved, I mean, those of us who know Ira, he's very, he's a smart guy. An attorney, well, I didn't want to put that on him. I think he'd be a real asset to this board. Billy Kennedy, of course, is a former member of this board. That always took a great interest in the Smoky Mountain and in the district he represented. So, in my opinion, these are two well-qualified folks who will bring a lot to this board.
If the board wishes, you could invite them to go ahead and attend the next board meeting.
Okay.
I would do it.
Okay. We'll invite you. Okay. All right, thank you, everyone. Moving right along, report of the chief executive officer, Brian. It's all yours.
I hope you won't be disappointed if I'm brief tonight.
Oh.
So then, when it's time to eat,
Almost, Ronnie. Let me, at the finance committee meeting, just a couple little updates here. You know, we did talk about this phase we're in now with having our meetings with DMA and Mercer, the state's consultants, on our rate negotiations, so we've kind of entered that phase now. It's certainly an important thing that we do. It's, that capitation rate is something we live with for a full year, barring some significant program change or something that would happen. So it's a two-phase process, the first of which is kind of an initial meeting where Mercer, namely Mercer, the DMA is less and less involved now, but Mercer kind of explains the methodology they use along with any kinds of features, either program changes or other factors that they will take into consideration with creating our rate. And of course, a lot of this is based on the historical utilization and trying to trend for changes and things like that. What happens is in another month or so, maybe a little longer, they will publish a rate for us, a suggested rate, and we will go back and meet with them and talk about our ideas about the suitability of that rate versus theirs. And in the meantime, we're going to provide some information to them to hopefully represent areas where either our spending does not accurately reflect things that are happening or going to happen, or trends that we see that we are about to participate in, or changes or whatnot that are going to somehow change sort of the trajectory of spending. Now that can either be on the administrative side or that can be on the service side. So that's kind of the process we're into there. Ridgefield. I know I saw an email the other day about the latest schedule. We're just going a little bit, maybe a week or two. I don't know, do you want to, is there a kind of the end of, middle of March? Is this going to start, when are we starting? First, second week of March?
I think that it will begin the second week of March. The actual move in departments are moving incrementally, starting at the bottom floor, 356.
I have to tell you, for something as major as this is, the number of problems or issues that at least, I kind of think of myself as the barometer of problems of, when I hear about something or people are so desperate I have to decide something, and it hasn't been much of that at all. It's really turning out nicely. A group of us were down there a couple of weeks ago. It's be a good facility for us. It'll be a little tight, and it's pushed us to think about the extent to which we need to have people on site versus out kind of in the world. That's been, I guess, a learning experience for many of our staff, and the extent to which people embrace that sort of working at home or working in the environment versus those that really don't. So it's been an interesting process around all of that. So it's just part of our own maturity. So that's coming along well. I was going to try to get at least the juices flowing a little bit tonight about what we'll do tomorrow. And I want to do that a little bit, and maybe there's a little homework that goes with this, but we have quite a lot more to do this evening in way of training that Tracy and Fred will be doing, so I don't want to spend a lot of time on this. We have time?
Dinner will be served at the earliest at 5:30, so you've got some time.
5:30. Well, I'll be done way before that.
We can make
What's in your, let me talk about what's in your packet, okay? So that you can, hopefully take a few minutes and look that over. Think about how that fits for tomorrow, and then be, maybe, a little more prepared for questions, particular things you'd like to hear us talk about. This is for you guys. I mean, this is a long version of what Brian, Dr. Heck, Mark, talk about a lot, okay? And we're pretty consistent in the conversations that we have here, but they're abbreviated. So, and I should add Tara to that as well. Tomorrow is the chance for you to think more deeply about this effort that we're involved in, how it relates to public policy, how it relates to the politics of getting anything done in North Carolina or anywhere, and what all that says about Smoky, really. So I tried to not, we're not doing a PowerPoint tomorrow. We're going to just talk. And it'll be Mark Malloy, who is the Senior Vice President for the Health Plan Solutions, or something very close to that, if that's not exactly it. And just by way, and tomorrow you'll have an opportunity to, I'll let Mark introduce himself. He kind of describes himself as somebody who grew up on the health plan side. Some of us have gotten into managed care and even insurance, you might say, more indirectly, like myself. I think the short story there is that Ron Paulus went out and kind of needed a guy or a woman who could really bring population health to Mission, because that was the direction they were going in. And I will tell you, Western North Carolina and Mission are better off for that decision that Dr. Paulus made with Mark. He's been a great guy for us to work with. Of course, Tara, I think most of you have had some experience with Tara, and she's partnered up with Lanier Canceller, with Canceller Collaboratives. Tara, we joke about her all the time. She's the Medicaid queen. She's forgotten more about Medicaid than probably most people will ever know. So she's been a tremendous asset to us in relationship to this whole effort. And from her tenure in state government, certainly understands not only the policy, but the politics part of things. Lanier, from time to time, of course, has also helped us. And then Danny has been a little less involved with this project, but still participating, and I wanted to invite him because he provides, really good context for this. I know that, oftentimes, we're so immersed in it that maybe we are not totally reflecting what's happening in the rest of the world of North Carolina. Where are we positioned? What do people think about that? I think we know something about that, but I think he'll give a lot of good context for tomorrow, because we are really different in this case with what we're doing. So those are the folks that will be speaking. Let me show you what we have. The easy part is this group. It's all got, I think, the council letterhead on it. We have our letterhead on it. This is the kind of our, I guess our platform, you might say. I'll give you a chance to find that and talk you through a little bit of it. I think this is one of all the years that I've been, doing this stuff down here. This is one of the better produced set of documents from my viewpoint. I'll talk about the first one. This one with the big, large red where it talks 73 million, 162,000, 40%. Everybody find that? This is about numbers. The legislature's success story on MHIDD, SA, Medicaid. There's so much still misunderstanding about what we do, what our relationship is to the Medicaid program, what our relationship is to Medicaid spending. It is just an ongoing challenge to educate people. They hear about Medicaid being broken. I mean, how many times have you heard that little quip? Well, our point is the part that we deal with is not broken at all. We've been doing exactly what everyone wanted us to do. Well, what is that? Well, let's see. in 1 year saved $73 million for the state, okay? As opposed to the rest of the Medicaid budget that has had a lot of problems with it. The problems have been associated with healthcare because that continues to be an unmanaged part of the system. We are a managed part of the system. Because we are a managed part of the system, we have been able to contain costs. The capitation thing I talked about, when we get that number, that's it. Okay, the only thing that changes that is the fact that there are more people eligible for Medicaid services. That's a multiplier for the rate. That's how the managed care system works. So that certainty around the budget and the predictability around Medicaid, that is what the General Assembly and the governor are after with health care. Okay? We've accomplished that in our sector. The budget deficit for Medicaid, behavioral health and IDD, and this is one that, for example, with state services, the budget for state-operated facilities, there are a lot of issues with that. That gets confused with what we do. Okay? The state is still an operator, of course, of psychiatric facilities and intermediate care facilities. Those budgets are hard to manage. They are essentially cost-based budgets. Okay? We don't have control over that. You've begun to hear the rumblings about the Facilities for Substance Abuse Services, the ADACs, Alcohol and Drug Treatment Centers. Okay, similar kind of feature where more and more concern about the cost of those. That cost is not reflected in what we manage. Okay, so there gets to be a lot of kind of bad talk about those budgets. Again, that's not us. We really try to differentiate ourselves. Penetration and access. Well, you can read inaccurate information on the internet about how, we have some incentive to not serve people. No, it doesn't work that way. In fact, in this month's edition of News You Can Use, there's a great article in there about how we lead the state in increasing access to care. Okay? So in this whole move to manage care, we're not serving less people, we're serving more people. Well, how do we do that? Well, we do that by using the features that are associated with managed care. That involves things like a closed network, making very specific decisions about funding. We fund fewer providers using state and county funds than we did previously. But because of that, we're able to serve more people, which is really a primary part of what everybody wants to see accomplished with managed care. And then they pick psychiatric residential facilities. And this is a great example of what you have in an unmanaged system. We had, by and large, a system that relied on tremendously expensive care for kids outside of their homes. Okay? Now, it would be one thing if that was helping these young people. Okay? And when we switched over into becoming a managed care company, Dr. Martin and our clinical staff really did a deep dive into what is actually going on with all of these kids that are in these facilities. And I sort of think of it as a due diligence period where we required clinical information that, let's just say, they didn't have to produce before, or it wasn't reviewed in quite the manner that it was before. And you know what we found out? What did we find out, Dr. Martin? That kids weren't really getting any better there. So we're spending all this money, and it would be one thing if people were getting better for it. You could kind of say, well, okay, are there some change? They really weren't all getting that much better for all the money that was getting spent. So the fact that we were able to give kids better care by managing what was happening to them, changing the expectations for providers, and I'm not anti-provider, I'm not blaming them. This is what you have in an unmanaged system. The fact that kids were able to get better, okay, and do that in systems of care that cost less, I mean, that's what we're doing. That's what this is about. And those are some of the benefits of a managed system. So those 3 or 4 bullets there are really big, and that's kind of the story behind the story. And Ronnie, you guys, I've seen your position on some of these things about supporting the LME, MCO, kind of public management in the future of whatever, Medicaid reform and healthcare reform becomes, and we're all for that. I think.
You can speak to it, Brian. I mean, in some parts of the state, of course, the privatization thing is, that conversation is out there, and that's where you have that, what we come out with it, in meetings in Raleigh and everywhere else. The privatization word is still there, and we just, I think everybody around this table agrees. Look at the history of where they've been, what happened. And they do have some advocates for that.
Sure.
But we find out that most of those advocates really don't know what to work with LME, MC. They don't know what it is. They don't know how it works. I mean, it's education if they want to be educated. It's hard to educate somebody knows everything.
Well, this would be a lot of what we'll kind of bump into tomorrow. And then this is really interesting, the last check mark. Now, the last time there was a document like this that the council put out, it was the council had a formal written position supporting the 4-region model. Well, the wording of this is a little different, isn't it? So I think and again, this isn't a smoky thing, okay? This is the council's overall position. I think it's well stated. It talks about flexibility, the need to see how the Medicaid program changes. It's more about consolidation of LME MCO functions. And I guess probably everybody has seen the articles about CenterPoint and Partners this week and their decision to no longer pursue merger. And the press release that CenterPoint did was very well done. Talked about all the advances that have been made in the Western Regional Partnership. You have good programs and what exactly was going to be gained by merging. And I guess at the end of the day, they looked at the balance sheet on that, couldn't see the advantages, nor could they come to agreement around some pretty core issues. So suspended it. And again, you can see the position of the council, I guess, certainly allow that kind of activity now. And certainly,
Where will that leave them? Will they still be able to, I thought the problem would be because they were too small, so we're gonna have to come together. Where is that gonna leave them if will somebody just walk in and say, you got no choice, you gotta do it?
well, that's a great question. Let me try to, and I think tomorrow we'll probably spend a little more time on this. The 4-region plan, I think, seems less suited to the world we live in now and what people anticipate around Medicaid and healthcare reform. So let's just say that a lot of people don't think this is as great an idea as it once was. Okay? Fair enough? So what's going to happen? Well, what I think is going to happen is that there will be forces that shape all of this that are much more important and significant than kind of drawing lines on the map. And I have to tell you, I was in the room where the lines got drawn. Okay, so I'm saying, we've all kind of gotten smarter, maybe, and able to look at things a little differently. Those forces are going to be how health systems develop, how accountable care organizations form, and what makes sense in terms of healthcare delivery. And this is a perfect segue to why we have the maps that I put in here for you. But to get to your question, at what point does a health plan become too small? Let's think of what Smokey does in Centerpoint and all of us. We're prepaid inpatient health plans. We're hybridized insurance plans, okay? When does the administrative scale of economy become too small? Or somehow the service funding become too small to be able to be viable? You know, it depends. I think, you know, I have colleagues that are coastal care, for example, and they've hovered right around, I don't know, 70,000 covered lives, maybe even dipping into the 60,000. That's about the size of Centerpoint, within a couple thousand, let's say. And the CEO there just publicly says, we've gotten too small. You know, we really are not viable any longer. And it is his opinion, as the leader of that organization, that their size is now impinging upon their ability to do what they need to do. And maybe it's not this moment, but for business reasons, you know, they have chosen to go and merge with a larger organization. Will Centerpoint come to that conclusion at some point? You know, I guess that would be for them to decide. But there is, you know, in the, let's say, the insurance business, size does matter. It makes a big difference. It makes a big difference in terms of the risk pool. It makes a big difference in terms of what you can do administratively, because it's a percent of that whole capitation, and on and on and on. But I don't think we know the answer to the question yet. I think it will be a better idea for it to evolve over the next couple of years rather than shaping it artificially. So, perfect segue into the other things that are in here in the packet. I would ask you to reread this tonight. If you read this once, read it again. It got rewritten as of this morning, with a little more emphasis in certain areas.
Which one do you want to hand out?
That'll even make more of an impression.
Oh.
You know, you've had this before, we've talked about it, you've seen it. Seriously, this would be a great thing for you to read tonight before you go to bed. Put it under your pillow, read it first thing in the morning, whatever works for you. Because this is the best 4-page explanation of what we're doing and why. Then, you know, you'll get the long version of this tomorrow with what we talk about. Make notes to yourself as you look at this. Because in our conversations where we meet with, you know, whether it's the leadership of health systems, legislators, whomever, this is kind of the framework that we use to explain ourselves. So very important. And if there were to be a quiz tomorrow on this, you know, make it an open book test maybe later. Okay? So look at that. This, again, if you lost this, you know, keep a hold of it. Because again, you know, this whole question, Nancy, you stole a little bit of the conversation from yesterday. You know, what about this whole 4-region thing? You know, how does that fit with any of this? Well, you know, you got a good part of the discussion already, but keep a hold of this, okay? Then, this is the thing that always has kind of killed me about the 4-region plan, and you heard me talk about it regularly. We have all these different maps and regions, okay? And the 4-region plan came out in the absence of really a lot of thinking about the other maps and regions, okay? For example, Community Care of North Carolina that is responsible for the help homes that exist, and they play a large role in managing Medicaid on the healthcare side, and we do a lot of work with. Wouldn't it be important in thinking about all of this to consider the lay of the land from their perspective? Well, look at that, okay? And that's why I put that map in there for you. Now, they are, I think, willfully planning some sort of consolidation, and I'm not on the inside track of that, but maybe I'll do a little research tonight on which way the wind's blowing with that. But again, that's kind of part of the picture that people should think about. Then we have what I think makes the most sense of all, and this was back, I forget when they did this. Yeah, last year, okay, December, I remember it was in the winter, December 5th, 2013, Truven. They did an analysis of healthcare service delivery on the Medicaid side and looked at where do people go for care. And again, isn't this just the most logical way that you would think about, if you're going to organize healthcare delivery in the Medicaid program, wouldn't this be the map you look at? Or this would be important somehow? This would be absolutely critical. So here you see an analysis of really two versions. There's a 6-region version and there's a 7-region version. And really good metrics here about the extent to which care is in-network and out-of-network. And again, so if you define that region, there's always going to be care that's delivered outside of the region. Well, how much? How much of that would be acceptable? It's really pretty intuitive once you get into it. Again, I think it's a great document, and it's probably, this would be a good one. Hold on to this, and then look at when ACOs develop, how close is this to the map that has ACO development on it? I bet it's going to have a lot of similarities, because this is where people go for care, okay? And then finally, this one that, gee, everywhere we go, people say, can I have a copy of that? This is, when Tommy and Jill deserve a lot of credit for having the patience to put this together. We have, I believe, 22 hospitals in our catchment area. And anymore, you can't just, know the hospital. You need to know their affiliation, okay? Because that becomes so important now when you begin to think about what role hospitals/health systems will have in the development of ACOs or insurance options in the marketplace. So this is kind of a new way that we have to be able to look at the world. So these are really important reference documents for you, okay? And I think by the time we get out of here tomorrow, you'll say, yeah, I understand why we got those maps and those things. So it'll be good basic information for you. And I think that's all I need to say. Look things over tonight.
All right, we have our homework. Is it appropriate not to go into closed session? Okay. We need to go into closed session pursuant to North Carolina General Statute 143 through 318.11A1 in order to prevent disclosure of information that is privileged or confidential pursuant to North Carolina General Statute 122C through 126.1 or not considered a public record within the meaning of Chapter 132 of General Statutes, and to consult with attorneys pursuant to North Carolina General Statute 143, 318, 11A, 3. So, is there a motion to go into closed session? So moved. Is there a second? Any discussion? All in favor of going into closed session, say aye. Aye. You opposed? Okay.
Of having cash to meet those obligations quickly, and that those assets are made not through some commercial transaction, but they're actually provided through a sophisticated provision of, through the PMPM, with primarily through the Medicaid program and the Division of Medical Assistance, and the basis upon which, for our eligible population within the 23 counties, we receive reimbursement for. The expectation here being that that flow of cash into smoking is relatively even and relatively predictable. So the issue in terms of AR and Y is raised by me as often as it is this is an aberration in terms of predictability of income. When there's an expectation, because we are an insurer, that we cover our liabilities as they are experienced, you need to have that cash flow to meet that liability in a predictable kind of fashion. So what else sticks out that's a little different in reference to what a balance sheet would look like at smoking versus a nonprofit or a commercial enterprise? When I look at the liability side of the equation, there's something that jumps out, and that is there are no long-term liabilities whatsoever. There's no bonds to retire. There's no long-term obligations. Every obligation on there is current, meaning the obligation experience has to be liquidated within the year, within the accounting period. You don't see that everywhere. That is highly unusual. In terms of owner's equity, here we're talking about fund balance. Ronnie had previously made comments in reference to it. There's a lot of restrictions in terms about fund balance. Fund balance by definition is if you have revenue over expense, it has to go someplace in terms of that surplus or earnings. On the other side of the accounting equation, where that ends up in is the fund balance. How that gets sorted out, once it's in fund balance, as you know, the organization does not have exclusivity in reference to the fund balance's use. I can't determine how fund balance is used on my own authority, and unfortunately, neither can the board. By state statute, approval is necessary, either by the Division of Medical Assistance or by the Division of Mental Health, Developmental Disabilities, and Substance Abuse. So that makes it functionally different than most boards and organizations have once dollars end up in the fund balance part of the accounting equation. The things that also look different in terms of smoking versus another governmental agency, understanding that we are a unit of local government, is that we do not classically operate under governmental accounting rules, and yet we do at the same time. Government accounting is based on cash, meaning you pay for something, you expend it. The whole term expenditure is a governmental accounting word. You will not find that in a commercial enterprise, because if this Smokey buys a car, it has to put it on the books. It's expended during that period of time, and as a normal government entity, it's not considered to be an asset depreciated over time. You spent it in the period, you bought it, it's done. Well, in a commercial enterprise, it's an asset, you have to depreciate it over time. The reason the balance sheet that you look at each month says modified accrual is you don't see depreciation on there. You don't see prepaids on there. You don't see accumulated vacation or benefits for employees on there. All of those are requirements that under a full accrual basis of accounting, you would have to have on the statement. So literally speaking, the audit is done on a full accrual kind of basis. The reports that we have to send in to the Division of Medical Assistance is done on a full accrual basis. But we have reports that are done on a modified accrual or simply on cash. So those are some of the discrepancies or differences that exist between governmental entity, a not-for-profit entity versus a commercial enterprise. That whole, the notion of how accruals are done are very, very different. That being said, I think I should proceed with this or else people will be upset. So just starting out with a group of definitions: budget development, fiscal management, and fiscal accountability. Going to definitions, you are responsible for the development of a budget. What is a budget? It's a financial plan with the sources of amounts of revenue. Notice that I always identify what is local, what is state, what is federal. That's because they all have different rules. So it's all represented and presented accordingly. It's done by fiscal year. The accounting period is between July 1st and June 30th. By the way, not all organizations have that fiscal period, so be aware that that is something that the organization is dependent on in terms of reporting its financial data within specific accounting periods. This whole notion, which I mentioned all the time in reference to an IBNR, incurred but not reported. These are estimates, meaning that when a service is provided by a provider out there that's within our network, our benefit plan, we have a responsibility. We have just incurred a debt. Well, I don't know about that debt because it's not in my hands in terms of the plan. But that doesn't mean that that debt does not exist. So we have to estimate what that debt is to go by the rules of what full accrual is, which means that a liability has been incurred. I don't have to know that that liability is in my hands to know with some degree of reasonableness that a debt has been incurred. For the ATM services that we provide and fund, we do an IBNR, an incurred but not reported report exclusive to each service. So that's what gets presented to DMA is exactly an analysis by service of what we feel IBNR is. And we do periodically check historically for what our estimates are, what the facts are, meaning as payments are received, what is the degree of accuracy in our projections. And typically speaking, typically meaning within over 98% confidence, it is between 98 and 100% right on. If you want to pick an individual service, can there be a variation a little above that? Yes. But historically, going back since the waiver, we have been on the 98 to 99% level of confidence in terms of the lifetime. Hopefully, I will do this right. Budget development adopted by fiscal year by the governing board yourself. We do have a requirement for a balanced budget. Balanced meaning that I cannot expend more than I believe the revenue should be. When adjustments are made, they must be balanced on both sides of the accounting equation. Appropriations lapse at the end of the year. The term lapse is a funny term indeed. For some items, when funds are lapsed, meaning they go into something, sometimes they return to the state, sometimes they go into fund balance. There are rules of what occurs with each lapse, given if expenses are over revenue for a given financial period and end up in the next financial period. So that is exclusive depending upon funding source. Expenditures may not legally exceed appropriations at the functional level. At the end of the budget adjustments that were presented in January, there were 6 categories: personnel, contracts, supplies. That's what's considered to be a functional level. In terms of the budget that you approve, I cannot, in terms of my spending, exceed any of those functional levels by more than $5,000 without going to the board for approval. Revisions of alternate functional levels by $5,000 must be approved by the governing board, which is you. In terms of timelines, typically speaking, it would be by April 30th. Budget requests are made of the departments and it's assembled internally. Not later by June 30th, the proposed budget is submitted to the governing board, and not later than July 1, the budget is adopted by the governing board. Just basic budget elements. It is fairly predictable. The state allocations within certain margins are also predictable. The Medicaid comes in on a per member per month. I can honestly say with how we fret, and that's the correct word, I think, over what our per member per month happens to be, the variation from one accounting period to the other accounting period does not tend to be great. The concern, though, is how those variations occur. It doesn't matter which service and which category of aid adjustments are made, and county maintenance of effort. There is a requirement, given historical contributions by the counties, that we maintain that level of effort through the future. Unfortunately, that notion of maintenance of level of effort does not take into account purchasing value. It takes into account dollar value. So in other words, what counties are purchasing through time as a natural consequence of the CPI index declines. Editorial comment, excuse me for one. Expenditures. State services, not an entitlement. In other words, when we go through the columns that talks about state programs, those particular services that fund the uninsured, meaning non-Medicaid recipients, are not entitlements. Medicaid services, as long as medical necessity is documented, is an entitlement. Just looking at the 14-15 budget, this is as amended as of the 22nd of January. Services, all the services that we fund are at $311 million plus. Administration is at 39.8. The risk reserve, and that is budgeted, meaning the risk reserve is based upon the PMPM received. So it's a percentage of cash, 2% of the Medicaid that we receive. So this is what we anticipate for the year, is at $5.89 billion. And other miscellaneous sources at 7.5. Excuse me for identifying miscellaneous is a large group of smaller things, whether they be ABC funds, whether they be county funds, whether they be funds received through litigation. It's that kind of pot. It's very big. Of the current budget revenues by source, overwhelmingly it's on the Medicaid side. As you see, it's over 80% of the dollars that we receive. State much smaller at 17%. The county maintenance of effort, we're rounded here, is less than 1%, and other sources at 4.6%. Budgeted expenditures by functional level. These are the contracts, the personal services, the supplies and materials, current obligations, fixed charges, and capital outlays. Overwhelmingly, the dollars that Smoky receives goes out in terms of contracts. Contracts are the services that we are providing from licensed independent practitioners as well as agencies that provide services for those with mental health, developmental disabilities, and substance abuse kinds of issues. Overwhelmingly, on the Smoky side, just looking at administration, salaries and benefits are the overwhelming expense of the organization itself. Very little is actually spent in other kinds of charges. Fiscal management, planning, directing, monitoring, organizing, and controlling the financial resources of the organization to accomplish objectives of the organization. Translation. Finances are resources that are used to promote the mission, vision, and values that the judge presented to you today. It's how we sort things out. It's how we allocate available resources. Guiding principles of fiscal management is consistency. There are requirements in reference to the presentation of the financial statements, for example, that I bring to the board, that how it is done in a routine fashion for period to period to period. It does not vary in terms of how the accounts themselves are organized. Then I'm fully accountable to both the CEO, to my colleagues on the executive committee, or to the board itself. Transparency in reference to the process. We are not only audited by URAC, I am audited by auditors on an annual kind of basis, as well as fully responsible to report on a monthly basis to DNA in reference to how we spend our dollars. Honesty is the basic principle and the responsibility of our entire group of institutions itself. Method of fiscal management. This is the tools of the trade and what's being done, financial reporting, comparative statements from one period to another, ongoing budget analysis, dashboards that are presented to you as well as being managed, trending of services through time, and the financial controls, internal controls that are in place that divide work among staff so that it minimizes the possibilities of misallocation. And early warning signs. Early warning signs, people always kind of scratch their heads and say, well, what is that? Early warning signs are when you fail to meet payments to, as an employer, to the federal government for the tax obligations, for example, that you are late in terms of completing lease payments on a monthly basis for the properties that you, which would indicate kinds of cash flows issues. Difficulties with meeting certain benefit plan obligations and payments due as far as those benefit plan obligations for us internally, those would also be warnings. Fiscal accountability, responsibility for the ways funds are used and managed. Appropriate controls to prevent excessive financial commitments or overspending. I am responsible to present on a monthly basis or whenever the board meets, and it's minimally 6 months out of the year that by the bylaws those financials must be reviewed. Internally, they are reviewed in a somewhat different way by the executive leadership itself. And again, on a monthly basis, quarterly, they are either done in person or on the phone where we go through the operations. Compliance with policies, regulations, and laws. Obviously, as is the case with all financial resources and public entities, they are multiply regulated both by the feds for the grants that we receive, by state government for the state grants that we receive, and for the PMPM as well as what's in the statutes themselves. Fiscal accountability, there are internal controls, there are segregation of duties, we are regulated by the accounting principles of GAAP. We utilize an electronic accounting system that has some internal controls within it. There are reconciliation among accounts that have to be made. By the way, those reconciliations often occur between ourselves and the accounting system that we have, which is GP. We're an outside, which is external to the organization and managed by MIS, so it's not like they don't know what we're doing. Cash management, investment of vital funds, positive funds, and disbursements. All of those are responsibilities either of myself or those external accountability, in some sense I've mentioned some of these already. Monthly reporting to DNA, Division of Medical Assistance, monthly reporting to DNH, IDEA, substance abuse, the annual independent audit that we must have. That does get reviewed by the local government control board. Semi-annual reports of deposits and investments that are made. Financial reporting to the finance committee itself and from this board. Just some ancillary things. You do receive a stipend. The attendance sheet and Jill pretty much regulates that on a routine basis. So this process is in the system. The W-2 is required. Questions?
Don't you have to go out over a certain amount of money to get a W-2?
Say it again.
You said a W-2 form is required. Don't you have to go over a certain amount before you get to that?
It is required under IRS rules that over $600 of a W-2 is required. Oftentimes, I think the belief in a government entity is you do it on a routine basis with everyone, simply so that when those thresholds, that they're not missed by so call it overprotective.
Well, you know, we've had major problems with our CFAC when it comes to some of this. And some of us choose not to accept stipends after we get to a certain amount so that we don't have to deal with all this. And it's been an ongoing thing, so, you know, I guess we need to do some more educating, at least to CFAC if we're gonna do things differently. And we're gonna lose members if we do things differently. I mean, you know, an extra $25 to certain people could make a difference in whether, if they're on subsidized rent and stuff, whether they stay on it. And we're not being consumer friendly or inclusive and looking out for their best interest if we don't look at these things and try to make them feel welcome at the table without causing them to be at the table.
Well, I'd be interested in your suggestions. I'm certainly willing to look at it. However, we do have IRS rules to live by.
Right, but I mean, some of the CFAC members choose to stop their stipends or not accept them at all before they get to the $600 level.
And Fred, for your history, there's been a lot of conversation with our CFAC. Brian Shippen, who's the liaison, you know what I'm saying? So what, you know, it's probably no news to you that what a dilemma it puts consumers in, and through the years, we've looked, you know, we have to do what's right, absolutely, and just try to understand what works best for them. So I think, Pat, you know, the door is always open for conversation, and not that there wouldn't be other options to look at. It's very hard. You're exactly correct in what you're saying.
If you get the W-2, then you have to put it on your tax.
So we all got one year, and then it said we could then we complained, many of them hadn't went over, but it said we could disregard because we hadn't many of them hadn't went over, but, so every year we try to get this straightened out. Then we get new staff and we go through it again.
Well, let's Pat, we're asking for some education, some educational information
I don't
to
know what
help
I'm
you
asking
navigate
for.
that.
I mean, you know, I will tell you this, we're gonna need education well beyond this meeting if, for me. I mean, you know, an extra $25, $50 could cost a consumer, if they're on certain programs, $3,000 or $4,000. And how you do things makes a difference in how it affects them too, because they've got all kinds of hoops to jump through.
Because if you get a W-2, you've got to turn it in on your taxes, correct? So that means that when they get that W-2, they're going to have to turn it in.
But if they're not over the limit, they shouldn't get one. But we had it worked out that way before you came.
Yeah,
The discussion is not over.
Yeah.
It's in process. We can certainly call it.
I just had a question, if we're done with that. I have a question about the structure of your finance department. Just roughly how many people and then how it's organized. Just, it doesn't have to be in great detail, just enough to understand it.
The head count is approximately 44, give or take. Most of those staff are in claims, which is with how things are set up, very labor intensive. And the finance staff, being those who are responsible for the finance record itself, is much, much smaller than that. So we're talking about 80 of us.
And you have an assistant
Yes. You met she's the senior director.
It seems pretty mean for a $360 million organization.
I would like you to say that to that gentleman over there.
Well, I'm actually saying that as a compliment.
That wasn't what he wanted it to be though.
No, you know, it's not, it's a lot of claims you process.
And that we have to do really well. It's no secret that when it comes to providers, if you want to really irritate someone, give them enough time, do it promptly, and communicate well. Those who get in trouble.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Quite good, Chris.
According to Jill. I'm done by 7:30 so that we can all enjoy our evening. This is your annual board responsibilities training. Some of you, if you've been on an LME board for a long time, you've probably had versions of this training on many, many occasions from a variety of people, probably from Mark Botts at the School of Government. We did kind of a much longer version of this training last year because we had so many new board members who were not really familiar with what an LME was or the history of how we became what we are today. So I don't really feel the need to do that again. Anybody who wants that can ask me for it, we'll do that. This is going to be a much shorter, just a refresher to remind you what your responsibilities are as board members for the board of directors of a local management entity managed care organization. So all of the board responsibilities are outlined in Chapter 122C of the North Carolina General Statutes, and that lists all the functions, powers, and duties of the board and of the LME. Obviously, your major role is simply to oversee the finances, activities, and overall direction of the LME-MCO. What we did in the bylaws, if you'll remember, is we separated out those direct responsibilities, those things that you as board members, that this board must do, versus the things that the LME must do, and you simply have to ensure we're doing. So your direct responsibilities are to approve the planning and budgeting of publicly funded mental health, developmental disability, substance use services within our 23 county catchment area. You have to approve the annual budget, quarterly reports, the annual progress report, and the annual local business plan. You have to appoint and evaluate the CEO. You have the authority to borrow money with permission of the local government commission. And you have to approve a set of bylaws and any board policies. And then you are generally charged with ensuring the compliance of the organization. The local business plan is a document that is approved on an annual basis. It's somewhat of an anachronism in our current iteration. This is something that's been in 122C for a number of years. It lists out how the services will be provided. It has to address how the provision of services will ensure access, how it will ensure the availability of qualified public or private providers, how consumer choice will be respected, and fair competition. The CFAC has to have the opportunity to review, comment on, and monitor implementation. And there is a direct relationship in the general statutes between this board and the CFAC. There are 3 CFAC members who participate as board members on this board, and there is supposed to be a relational agreement between the board and the CFAC. And I have reached out to Brian Shupin because I understand we have not had one of those.
We're working on it.
We're working on it.
We're working on it.
Okay. So that's one of those things that will eventually come to this board for us to approve a new relational agreement. Okay. There are certain certain requirements that you have to ensure related to the area director, the CEO. The CEO has to have, this is by statute, the CEO must have a master's degree in management experience. The CEO serves at your pleasure pursuant to a contract. The CEO has to have the same benefits as LME employees, except for any special benefit related to severance or relocation so that you can attract talent. And you have to perform an annual evaluation with some very specific criteria that are set out in a rule. And I've got it there, the Charlie Franklin rule. You may remember who Charlie Franklin was. I see Chuck might remember. He was, and I know Christina remembers. Charlie Franklin was the LME director out in Albemarle. And
He's got pipes again.
he is currently drawing the highest retirement in the North Carolina retirement system, higher even than Lee Dean Smith. So he, when people found out how high his salary was, it wasn't just him. His secretary also had a higher salary than the governor at the time. And that the LME had given them those salaries, and so the state said, area directors need to have the same kind of salaries that comply with the state personnel plan. And if you want to go above that, you have to go to the state personnel office and ask permission. So what are your responsibilities as board members? These I tried to just kind of put the main ones. Obviously, the biggest responsibility is for you to attend our board meetings. We need you to be here. We need you to be active and participate. You need to report any conflicts, and we'll talk some more about that in a minute. You need to comply with our code of ethics. If you'll remember, with our bylaws this last time, we put in place a code of ethics for board members, which we had not had in place before. You need to respect the privacy of the consumers that we serve and the confidentiality of any communications that we discuss in closed session. I added this one. We really need you to read the materials that we provide to you and understand what we do, so that when people in the community ask you about, what does it mean for you to be on the board of Smoky Mountain LME MCO, you can actually explain what we do. Because I will tell you that in our 23 counties, there is still a lot of misunderstanding about what we do. Would you agree with that, Christina?
Absolutely.
And every day. In fact, I will most likely be in court next month so that I can explain to a judge in a county, I don't have to tell you which county, but in one of our 23 counties, what we do. Because we got an order wanting us, it's a show cause order for somebody from Smoky to come and explain why we're not paying for something. I get this order and, I immediately pick up the phone and I'm, well, why aren't we paying for something? Well, it turns out that nobody's asked us to pay for it. We have to actually have a request before we can pay for something. And no request has been submitted. And in fact, the treating provider, the treating psychiatrist actually at Broughton, doesn't want the service that this particular government entity wants. So we're going to have to do some education about what it is that Smoky does. So we just ask that you all really understand what we do. And if you don't understand what we do, if you have any questions, to ask them. You can call any one of us, any of the senior directors that you've met here, Brian, Christina, email us at any time. If you get questions from consumer stakeholders that you don't know the answer to, let us know. We'd be very glad to help. And then you have to do this annual training that is so exciting. It's actually in the statute. The statute says that DHHS will do it, but they have never done it, so we took that on for ourselves. So your code of ethics, some quick points. Obviously, we want everyone should be respectful, comply with the conflict of interest, don't accept gifts from consumers or providers. It should not, participation on this board should not be to your financial advantage, personal benefit. In terms of government property, any property that we have as government property cannot be used for personal use. If you're speaking in public, to make sure that you differentiate if you're speaking on behalf of yourself or MAHAG or the County Commissioner Association versus speaking on behalf of Smoky. To make sure you're familiar with our rules and bylaws and policies, we talked about attendance and confidentiality, and to just overall in everything that you do enhance the integrity of this board. Okay, so conflict of interest, we didn't do our little disclosure. today, because I knew we were going to talk about it here. So board members have to properly disclose any actual, potential, or perceived conflicts of interest that could arise as you are all very active members of your communities. And this means conflicts related to consumers, stakeholders, or anyone that does business with Smoky. And we do keep lists of all of our contractors, so if anybody ever said, you know, I'm not sure if somebody is a contractor, we can provide that list to you at a moment's notice. And both the fact of a conflict, the actual conflict, and the appearance of a conflict of interest is to be avoided. And at the last meeting, Mandy Stone asked if we could put this into our bylaws to define what is a conflict. And so I'm throwing this up here for your consideration. This is what we use in our internal code of ethics for Smoky employees to define a conflict. And a conflict of interest may occur if any board members' outside activities, personal financial interests, or other personal interests influence or appear to influence his or her ability to make objective, unbiased decisions in the course of their membership. And that's a pretty standard definition of a conflict of interest. And so it's an actual conflict, or again, it's anything that could be perceived by individuals in the community as a conflict. So, with a conflict of interest procedure as board members, the first thing to remember is that you have a duty to disclose. We shouldn't find out about it afterwards. You should come forward and say, I have this potential conflict, let's talk about it. You need to recuse yourself from any vote that could be impacted by a potential conflict. And then the board, when you report that conflict, the board determines whether in fact it is a conflict and how to respond to it. If you have a conflict, doesn't mean you can't serve on the board. It just may mean that there are certain activities you can't take part in or certain votes that you can't participate in. It's a standing agenda item, just so that we keep everyone's awareness on that, and to make sure that people can't say, oh, hey, I didn't know I could do that. Again, we have a list of providers and stakeholders and contracted entities if you need that. And then we have the annual disclosure form and that you can update as needed, and we'll do that in this month's board meeting. Violation of the conflict of interest policy is grounds for removal from the board. And actually, I forgot to mention in terms of attendance, that was one of the new things that they put into the state law, is that this board can remove members who do not attend regularly. That had not been in the statute previously. So we've never done that, and we don't want to have to do that, but it's important that people attend.
Can we have a requirement, I mean, is there something like you have to, if you miss so many meetings,
Yes.
you will be notified or talked to, or?
It's in the bylaws, but I forget how many meetings it is. Jay, do you remember? Is that 2 or 3?
I think it was 3.
Great. So the board has the ultimate responsibility for compliance of this organization. The bylaws allow me to report any compliance issue directly to this board and allow you to hire an independent investigator or outside counsel if you want to investigate any concern that you have about Smoky operations, or about me, or about Brian, or about Christina, or anything. We do have an effective compliance program that addresses and incorporates the Office of Inspector General guidelines. I'm not going to bore you all with that because I did that like 3 months ago. But this is what I did want to talk about. Why do we have a compliance program? What's the point of it? Well, there's a whole bunch of laws that say we have to have one, but to me, this is why we have a compliance program. Whether those laws said we had to have one or not, I would want us to have one because we manage a huge amount of public dollars. We maintain a large volume of protected health information. We employ over 450 individuals, and we oversee services to a very vulnerable population. And for those 4 reasons, it is extremely important that we have an active, engaged, and functioning compliance program. So, how do we have a compliance program? Everybody familiar with this? Have you seen this in the news, the Anthem data breach? Over at last report, which was I think about 2 days ago, I saw their latest update. They had revised it to say that 78 million individuals were impacted by this data breach. This was the result of a criminal hack into their system. It was interesting, I read the other morning, in an article, it basically said that right now, electronic health records, a person's health record, can be sold for anywhere between $10 and $1,300 on the criminal market. So it's a criminal business, it's a criminal enterprise, and hackers are looking for ways to exploit systems. Security experts are saying that insurance companies and health plans are at extremely high risk. Because part of this is because most of us, we don't deal with credit cards, and so we've never implemented the same type of protections that entities that process credit transactions do. But we have a lot of the same valuable information, social security numbers, dates of birth, other identifying numbers, and not just for our consumers, but for our providers as well, because we have to run criminal background checks on all owners, operators, managing employees, and practitioners. And so when we run those criminal background checks, the only way you can effectively run a background check is to have the person's social and date of birth. So we have to gather that information, which means we have that information stored in our computer system. So this is all information that people can exploit. And then there's the piece that we have to worry about internally about our own staff and what is going on and making sure that they are maintaining privacy and security. These were probably some of the two biggest breaches that I'm aware of in the last year or so. The Anthem breach, of course. This was a big breach in May of last year where a doctor disconnected his personal computer from the hospital network and had a bunch of PHI on it. And it left patient information vulnerable to discovery through Google or other search engines. And OCR fined Columbia University and New York Presbyterian $4.8 million. That would be a big chunk of our fund balance. So, this is why we have a compliance program. And then this is another important piece. The federal sentencing guidelines say there are significant reductions in fines if the organization that's where they have found a violation had an effective compliance program in place. The feds understand that breaches occur, but what they're not going to be accepting of is if a breach occurred and you had nothing in place to prevent that. If they come on, they do an audit, and you had appropriate measures in place, your fines are going to be much, much lower. Some other reasons we have a compliance program, there's a lot of litigation out there. How many of you are familiar with the KC versus Bosch settlement that has recently been reached? Pat, I know you are, as a board member with disability rights. So some advocates, that would include disability rights in North Carolina, Rural Services of the Southern Piedmont, and the National Health Law Program, sued Cardinal back when they were still called PBH, and the Department of Health and Human Services for some alleged violations related to the innovations waiver. It would take me probably an hour to explain what those alleged violations were. Really just had to do with how decisions were made and communicated with the use of a tool that Cardinal uses called the Supports Needs Matrix tool. It had to do with due process. Medicaid beneficiaries are entitled to due process whenever a service is denied, reduced, terminated, or suspended, because Medicaid is an entitlement program. So that's another big difference between, Frank talked a lot about the difference between us and a corporate entity or a nonprofit. Big difference between us and a private health plan. We have what we all, most of us in here have private insurance. And if your private insurance denies your benefit, you have some options for appealing under the benefit plan, but nothing like what a Medicaid beneficiary has, because Medicaid is an entitlement program, whereas your private insurance is not. And so the courts have found, this actually dates back to a Supreme Court case, Goldberg versus Kelly, where the court said Medicaid, food stamps, those programs are entitlements, and if the government wants to take that entitlement away, the person has to have notice and the right to be heard at a hearing. And so what that means is we have a huge appeals department. I say huge. We have an appeals department that handles a huge amount of appeals that are filed by consumers contesting denials, reductions, terminations, and suspensions related to their service authorizations. So the department and Cardinal reached a settlement in December 2014, and this settlement applies to the entire state, including smoking. So we have a lot of things that we're going to have to do under it. But note that last bullet point. Cardinal paid $375,000 to the attorneys who filed this lawsuit to pay for their attorney's fees as part of the settlement. And that is on top of what Cardinal paid their own attorneys, which I would conservatively estimate at $1 million easily. So again, that is not something that Fred has let me put into the budget. We don't have a $1.5 million legal retainer.
Yeah, we're not that close.
So again, these are why we have a compliance program. I am weekly involved with the staff who do these appeals. We actually have a standing weekly Friday at 2 o'clock meeting where I meet with the clinical support team either by phone or in person at the Westwood office to talk about issues that have come up with appeals and requests so that we can make sure that the notices that go out comply with all the rules and regulations. So how are we addressing all of these risks? These are just some examples of things that we have done this year to address these concerns. We hired a contracts director who he is JD. He's not licensed in North Carolina. He and his wife moved here from Louisiana. She's a pediatrician in Hendersonville, and we hired him. We hired a risk management director. These have been phenomenal additions to our team. Did you say that, Christina?
Yes.
Really helping whip us in shape. Our compliance committee now meets monthly instead of quarterly. We've expanded who's on that committee. The privacy and security committee meets twice a month. Just because there are so many issues that have arose. All organizations of our size have to complete what's called a HIPAA security risk assessment. We have to log breaches. We have to report them to the EMA and to the feds. So it's a big responsibility. We have been engaged in discussions with Wells Fargo to purchase cyber liability insurance. And I think we're close to finalizing that, correct? Training. I am a big believer in training. We do training all the time for our staff. It is offered routinely. This is a big part of our new employee orientation and staff do compliance and privacy and security training at least annually after that. We're getting ready next week to do 3 rounds of due process training for all the staff who interact with consumers and families to make sure that they are in compliance with the requirements of that settlement I mentioned. Email encryption, this is a big thing that we do. We've always done this. One of the changes we decided to make this year is that our emails effective July 1 will be automatically encrypted instead of staff choosing to encrypt them. We will have to choose to de-encrypt them. And archiving, we do not have a good system in place for that, and that is to make sure that we are in compliance with public records laws. And then just a variety of different internal controls, policies, and procedures have been implemented this year to improve our compliance. 7:05. Does anybody have any questions? Hey guys.
So, I believe this is all we have for tonight. And then Brian, this is all.
It says total.
Jill, is there anything on the consent agenda?
Oh, yeah, that's right.
There is one item on the consent agenda, Rick.
Okay.
The Performance and Quality Committee did not meet this month, and so the reports that are normally reviewed by the Performance and Quality Committee are on the consent agenda.
Okay, so do we need to approve those reports? Is there a motion to approve the Performance and Quality Committee reports that are part of the consent agenda?
I'll make that motion, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. There's a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
All right, any discussion? All in favor of the motion say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay. Tomorrow morning, we're supposed to start promptly at 7:30 a.m.
About 10 o'clock.
Yeah, really. Here, is it here in Jill? Jill,
Excuse me?
7:30 here?
No, we're in the Stuyvesant Road, which is just right across.
Okay.
really going to start
And so the meeting, 7:30 is breakfast. The meeting starts at 8:30.
Okay. 7:30, meeting starts at 8:30.
So if we don't want
I
breakfast,
can sleep for 5 o'clock.
Yeah.
Hey, tomorrow's a late day for you.
Sorry.
Is there, we need a motion for adjournment. Is there a motion for adjournment?
I said,
I've been
Okay, we have a motion and a second.
1:36 this morning.
All in favor of adjourning, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay, we'll see you in the morning. Let's get started. Welcome, everyone. We're gonna get started. I believe we're gonna do the roll call. I believe I've got everybody checked, so if you're not here, say something. Nancy Baker.
Here.
Ronnie Beal. Larry Cox. Carolyn Howard.
here.
Maggie Faulkner.
Here.
Rick French, I'm here. Myrna Harris.
Here.
Judy Johansson.
Here.
Pat McGinnis. She was here.
She's here.
Okay. Duncan Sumter. Here. Charles Lyons. Anybody else? Okay. Brian, I'll turn it over to you.
Sure. Well, I hope everybody had a good night. Good breakfast. We preferred some ripe bananas.
They were a little green.
We were.
Is that what they were?
Plantains or something. Well, you got to hear me talk about our guests a little bit last night, just to give you folks some context. We touched on things a little bit to try to create a framework for today. Everybody had homework assignments, and I did mention you'd be getting the quiz, Tara,
Oh, good.
promptly at 9 o'clock. So if you do some last minute studying, you better get busy.
Nothing's used to that.
Yeah. The redone executive summary, probably nothing, we won't be able to describe anything any better than what is in there, really. It'll just be kind of a longer version of that, I think, today. We really work to try to get that to a point where it reflects our best thinking about things. Explain the maps, because there's still so much conversation about regions, both for LME, MCOs, and with ACOs developing, what will the regions be and all of that. And the context we have are that we have LME, MCO regions, we have CCNC regions, and we have healthcare regions. And somehow all of that, I guess, has to shake out into something as healthcare and Medicaid reform here to move forward. And then also shared the legislative packet from the council, which was mainly talking about the accomplishments of LME, MCOs, and how we're not the part of Medicaid that growth in life. I don't know if we do that. We're not. We're saving the state money, we're doing good for folks, and hopefully that'll keep us in a good position going forward. So, all things we'll be able to kind of pull together today, hopefully. How many people really have had a chance to meet Tara or do any work with her? Some board members, as part of the whole consolidation, assimilation, whatever I guess verb we should use to describe our relationship with Western Highlands. And Tara and Lanier were real involved with that and very involved with the board, and been around North Carolina a while. You know, Tara Larson was kind of like a household word, right? So to speak. If you do a lot of talking about Medicaid at your dining room table at night, her name will always come up. That's what I found.
I bet I know her way back further than some of you folks. I remember when she first got out of college and she came to work at Black Mountain Center as assistant director. I worked for her.
Well, why don't you give people a little rundown on your background?
Well, I think Pat just did. Yeah, Pat and I worked together at Black Mountain Center.
Years and years and years ago.
Years and years ago. So, yeah, I was at Black Mountain Center and actually left Blue Ridge Center to go to work at the Black Mountain Center. So, been around the system for quite some time. go to Raleigh, Ronnie.
I'm glad they did.
In '94, and worked in the Division of Mental Health, Developmental Disabilities, and Substance Abuse Services for a few years, and then moved over to Medicaid, and was over in Medicaid for a few years, and then retired from the state after 32 years. And then Linear Council asked me to come join him, and we've been off and about consulting, and that's how I started working with Ryan. He and Kristen contracted with us to come help you guys with the Western merger, and then go from there. We've been a part of your team ever since then.
Tara, as I said last night, she's been a great asset to us in thinking through our solution for Medicaid reform and healthcare reform. So we're happy she's part of the group. And Mark, he's been a great find. We're very happy that Dr. Paula's so bold as to hunt down a population health guy and lure you to western North Carolina.
Wasn't much of a lure. It's a beautiful place here. I've been here since April of last year. Most of my experience has been on the health plan side. I ran a health plan for Coventry Healthcare in Delaware, Maryland market for a while. Before that, I was the chief operating officer for the health plan in Georgia with Coventry. And before that, I was with FM Southeast region, overseeing all the contracting, all the network development, all finances associated with FM Southeast region for about a decade. When I was done with working on the managed care side, I moved over to the provider side and started working for a physician-owned organization in Philadelphia. There were about 260 primary care physicians that were part of the what we would now call an ACO. At the time, it wasn't a term for it. And these physicians had developed some pretty innovative technology, innovative processes, and some pretty talented people. They were doing some pretty amazing things. They were able to demonstrate really improved quality that could be measured against the entire country. They were running in the 90th to 95th percentile of all of the quality metrics that are standard in sort of the HEDIS and NCQA style metrics. We created a company out of that organization that took the people, processes, and technology and put it in a company called SMC Healthcare Solutions. And 18 months later, we sold that to Healthways, which is a public company traded on the NASDAQ. We also became one of the original pioneer ACOs, so 32 original ACOs, we were one of them, and the only one to be a physician-led organization. Since then, there are a number of physician-led organizations around the nation, but we were the first ones to convince CMS that we should do that. Those were some pretty heavy times. I had the opportunity to testify in front of the Senate Finance Committee. That was a moment I will always remember. On television, you see a room that always seems to be filled with senators, but what happens is that you're sitting here with your panelists, and one by one, based on their schedules and when they're going to speak, they come into the room, the camera zooms in on them. And so when you're watching from home, you think everybody's there the whole time, but it's this big room with a couple of senators here and there. Eventually, they all cycle through, but an interesting time. After the sale of Essentia to Healthways, I ended up coming to the conclusion that I didn't like traveling, waking up in hotels, and not knowing the city I was in, as we were traveling around the country trying to roll out physician-directed population health. And a good friend, former mentor, and former boss of mine said, hey, I've got a great opportunity for you in a hospital system. And I said, really? So what are they doing? He said, well, they're forming an accountable care organization, trying to organize their physicians to work collaboratively together with the hospital system. Is this something you'd be interested in? I said, sure. Where is it? I was really tired of Philadelphia too, so I was down in Florida at that time when he called. He said it's in Asheville. I said, Asheville, North Carolina. He said, yeah. I said, I'm actually going there for Christmas with my fiance. fiance, we were going to park in, we were going to celebrate there. And he says, well, let me see if I can make a connection. On December 26th, a year ago, this past December, I met Ron Hollis for the first time, and we talked for maybe 40 minutes. I knew immediately that we were clicking on all cylinders. Came back and met a senior team in the springtime, and then the rest, as they say, is history. Started in April. By June, we had formed something called Mission Health Partners. We filed for a Medicare ACO contract. We have, coincidentally, 260 primary care physicians in this ACO. We were awarded the contract as of January 1st. We have 44,000 Medicare beneficiaries in the ACO. We've moved into our new offices down at 267 McDowell, so if anybody's in the neighborhood, please stop in and say hi. It's the old Fullerton genetics lab. It's been sterilized, so I think. But it's exciting. We're building out our team there. We've got a lot of investments that we're making in technology. We're building up the staff right now. We put our own employees into the mix here, so that's another 16,000 folks that we're responsible for as of January 1. We're talking to commercial payers, trying to do more of those types of deals. And of course, we're very interested in the Medicaid Reform Act that we hope will see make its way through the long session this year to produce the 1115 waiver to give us the permission to really begin to take care of a population that has been largely, not largely, entirely underserved in a lot of ways. So excited to be here. Thanks for the opportunity to say a little bit.
Good deal. Good deal. Well, Danny Coughlin, he was somebody I've worked with for a long time, in a couple of different states. He's retired now, fortunately. He says his blood pressure is really stabilized since that's happened. I'll let him tell you more about that if he cares to.
How he keeps his blood pressure down?
Yeah. And retired from Cardinal, Piedmont, and was kind of the driving force behind a lot of the reform associated with the transition from area programs to LMEs to MCOs, and he has gained a lot of knowledge over the years and now continues to work with several MCOs across the state and works with the council and does some work with us, and I thought he'd be a good addition to the group today to provide some context. We get kind of caught up in our own think a lot of the time, and Dan has good perspective, I think, on what we're doing and what the state is doing and even how that fits nationally. So we'll look forward to him chiming in. What would you like to add to that, Professor?
I'll give you a little bit about my history. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Thanks for being here. I really appreciate the opportunity to listen. I should start out by saying I really feel lucky to be part of what you're doing, the small part that I'm playing. I'm more than impressed with the vision that leadership here has developed. I think it's the future. I think it's cutting edge, to use an old term. I think you're going to set the tone for public policy and behavioral health delivery for the foreseeable future. I think you're way in front of the pack in terms of the sophistication of your thinking. And I think it's so big and done well, so important that it'll be a national phenomenon. And that's not hyperbole. I'm very serious about it. So it's I'm happy to be here, and I'm happy to be able to contribute a little bit maybe that I can, and also learn from you. Because again, you guys are right out in front. Me, I spent my career in behavioral were so many systemic problems with service delivery, care, quality of care, financing, that my time would be better spent, or I was more interested in helping to move public policy. That was actually back when the biggest public health policy thing in behavioral health was deinstitutionalization. We were emptying, in New York, we were emptying 100,000 inpatients, all in the streets across New York, and we didn't know how to do it, so it was a big mess. And is that kind of thing that you look at and said, boy, this is big stuff, and if you're going to do anything about it, it's got to be, you got to approach it from a macro level. So anyway, I stayed in public sector. I ran a behavioral health department for a small hospital network in upstate New York. I worked for Value Options, which is a behavioral managed care organization, national private sector commercial managed care company, setting up networks of care throughout New York State for the purpose of doing a special needs plan. And then I came to North Carolina at almost the exact time that North Carolina said Jim was going to reform the behavioral health system back in 2000. It was my opinion that while there were great intentions in terms of that reform and what it would consist of, I didn't think they knew how to do it. So that's how we got to the powers that were at the time and convinced them to let us do a Medicaid waiver to be able to demonstrate using that insurance model, that payer model, to align incentives to try to move the system, turn the battleship in terms of better quality of care, more organized care, so on and so on and so on. And when we got that about done, I thought that was a good time to exit. I've been enjoying myself since. That's my story.
So, we got some horsepower here for you today. Let me start off, and Mark and I, and sometimes Jeff, and I know he's wishes he could have been here with us this morning. We'll have to let him pay us back somehow, I guess, for covering his part of the show here today. You know, we've gone out and had this conversation many times, and usually it makes sense to start off with a kind of, so why are we here, right? You know, what's going on? And if you looked at the paper last night, which I hope you did, that's kind of the first part there. And that's the first part of our presentation this morning, to kind of get everybody grounded in why would we even be thinking like we're thinking? What are the drivers for that? Well, there are three really big forces in North Carolina. There's certainly the governor and the plans that exist in the Department of Health and Human Services that are articulated by the Secretary. And there's the General Assembly, and the General Assembly, has different views on things depending if you're in the House or you're in the Senate. So really we end up with having to think about the perspectives of really three groups. And when it comes to reading the tea leaves, trying to look at each one of those plans or whatever they have put forth and try to analyze that and say, okay, at the end of the day, how is all this going to pan out? And that's been our frame of reference. And I think everybody understands the short session didn't make as much progress on Medicaid reform as people probably had hoped. And there was some thinking that they would come back and tackle it. Well, probably a little too complex for that, and they punted to the long session. So, there's debate about the extent to which this will be a major agenda item in the long session. I think you should count on it being a major agenda item in the long session. So, the notion that we should try to figure something out was a very strong factor. For me on behalf of Smokey, for Mark on behalf of Mission, and if Jeff were here, he would say the same thing on behalf of Mayheck. And Mayheck has a very strong relationship with Mission. They have a business relationship with Mission. They manage the primary care sites of Mission. So they have a real vested interest in how all of this is going to work out. Beyond even their keen interest in public policy and how they need to focus the experience of physicians that they're launching out, into the world. So you have these three bodies essentially trying to create public policy. Well, what did the Secretary and the House of Representatives had fairly similar plans for Medicaid reform. The Senate, a little different. I mean, they added in a tweak more about competition and advantages, I guess you could say, of the private sector. And I think the media maybe has, they emphasize that too much. It becomes kind of, the view that the Senate is all about privatizing and, bypassing the public sector. I'm not sure that's necessarily accurate. I think they maybe express the frustration that exists and the inability to kind of progress all of this and offer that up as a potential solution. And it's a very real solution. The backdrop for all of this is if somebody doesn't get their act together, it becomes far too easy to just call the dark side where Mark used to work, right? Because they promise the world and they'll kind of deliver it for maybe a year or two, and then there's a lot of track records that don't look real well around all of this. And in fact, Mark put together a really good paper that talks about the experience of commercial managed care in the Medicaid market, which is not, I guess, too glowing in terms of the performance of a lot of those programs. So, what are the common elements? If we just kind of leap right into this. Budget certainty, right? All states want to get away from being at risk for Medicaid expenses, whether it be behavioral health, IDD, or health care. Now, North Carolina, for better or worse, went at this a little differently maybe, where the behavioral health and IDD sector that we represent, they pushed that out first. That's been managed successfully. That's what the stuff from the council is all about, how successful all of that has really been. And, has it been uneven? Sure, it has been. But at the end of the day, if you're in the General Assembly, you ought to be loving on what we've done. Because we've controlled cost and we have a predictable Medicaid budget, and nobody is, lined up outside legislators' doors anymore complaining about the lousy LME MCOs, right? So, budget certainty, predictability around Medicaid. On the healthcare side, we don't have that. We're still living in a fee-for-service world. And the state desperately needs to get away from it. So any of those three, that's one of the ingredients. General agreement around ACOs as being the structure that can best deliver that. And we'll talk later, we'll let Mark and Tara kind of give you a Accountable Care Organizations 101 to give you some idea of what those structures are really like. Basically, provider led organizations that are responsible for the care and the payment for services. And then the third ingredient really is whole person care. Who doesn't, think that's a great thing? A lot of reasons why we have the system developed in the manner that they have historically, but, great interest in putting all of those things together. So those are the, if you really reduce all of this, those are the common elements that are part of the plan from the governor and from both houses of the legislature. And that was kind of our starting point. When we sat down, we said, okay, whatever we figure out, it's going to have to include these ingredients. So that's kind of the framework that we're working from. So, does that make sense? Sound familiar? We had this conversation before, and that's really where we are, where the General Assembly is starting now. Okay. And I think we're now ready to go into closed session, aren't we?
Okay.
Motion to close session, Mr. Chairman.
Wait a minute, close, we just have a motion, Mr. Riddle. Closed session pursuant to North Carolina General Statute 143-318-11A1, in order to prevent the disclosure of competitive health care information pursuant to North Carolina General Statute 122C through 126-1. Okay, yes?
That same motion.
Okay, thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Chris. All in favor of going to closed session, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay.